welcome everybody. My name's Charles Stanhope. I'm on the board of the Southwest Harbor Public Library, and we're delighted to have you join us. I wish I were at the sea breezes at the heart or the mouth of the Somersville Southwest Harbor, but I'm not. I thought it was a better image than the books on the shelves behind me. So welcome. Thank you for your interest in this topic and our author for the evening, Rebecca Milliken. I have a little housekeeping to share with you, and we'll get started very shortly with Rebecca, who is standing by. So housekeeping, we are recording the session, so your participation, your voice, your image may or may not appear in the final production, which the library will prepare and launch, and I believe we'll tell all of you when it's publicly available so you can share it with friends. The library, as you saw in the opening slide, is open for business, and it's very proud to let you know that it has air conditioning. So if you need a fresh breath of air in the humidity around us, drop in and see the library again if you haven't been in for a while. And they're still doing pickup, and there's still a very active interlibrary loan going on. So we're at your disposal, and we look forward to seeing you. Once again, everything we do depends so much on you, your support of our fundraisers, your support of our appeals. We know we couldn't do it without you, and thanks so much for your persistence and support and helping us do the best job we possibly can for you in our community. Last year was the library's 125th anniversary, and it all got postponed because of you know what. So we're hoping to, once we get back to a stable environment, we hope to resume and restore some of those activities we had planned for our 125th year, and we're now in our 126th year. Letting you know what's coming up. This is Flamingo Festival Week in Southwest Harbor. There will be a parade and other activities along Main Street, and the library uses this opportunity to host its annual humongous book sale at the American Legion, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So please come by and find those treasures that have been elusive to you on your wanted to read list. And we have had the experience that books have been picked up in August and brought back for reselling and resharing for the next round of humongous book sale. In August, we have an art auction all month long, a celebration of art. So look for that on the website. It's an online auction. A selection of those items that are donated for the auction are on the walls of the library, and another selection across the month of, that's August. And in the month of July, we're delighted to have paintings from Catherine Obard and a selection of the historic stereographs from the library's collections. And one last thing, or two last things. One is July 13th, library is proud to be participating as one of 70 Maine libraries with the Maine Humanities Council Read Me program. And we'll be hosting a presentation by the author Matt Cost. You can find all about that on the webpage. Books of his will be available for purchase in the library. A portion of those sales will be coming to the library's benefit. The Matt Cost lives in Brunswick and has written a couple of other books, but he's now into mystery writing, and he will be a participant on Maine Calling, the radio show on MPBN, on August 19th. So come and get your book and read and tune in to listen to him and ask your questions of him on MPBN. The most important thing is we are also making available to you Rebecca's book. So it's available online or through the circulation website and the telephone number. So if you need to pick up a book and get it read, it's really a wonderful read, and it's a wonderfully written memoir. So Erich and Kate, are we inviting Rebecca now?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. So I'm delighted on behalf of all of us, the library board, the library staff, all of our readers, and all of you signed up this evening to welcome Rebecca Milliken, the author of Gaining Altitude. If you haven't had the chance to read it, I think you will find it engaging and charming, and a real accomplishment for her, because she tells you the story of how it came about, how the idea gave birth. She gave birth to the. Can you tell that I'm not a normal commentator person? That it's just a great story, and we'll delve into it. And there'll be an opportunity for all of you to participate in questions and answers a little bit later on. I wasn't going to go through a recitation of Rebecca's academic background. I just want to say she's a successful mother and a successful therapist with significant accomplishments in that realm, and had her practice in Washington, D.C. And she approached the decision about turning from therapy and counseling to this activity, which has resulted in this charming book with an absolutely wonderful illustration on the cover. And we're delighted that she's got some Maine roots that we might explore in a little bit of depth. And we'll learn the story of how she explored her life and planned for her future, having left her practice. So thank you, Rebecca, for being here.
Thank you, Charles. That was really wonderful. And I really appreciate being invited to do this by both you and by E-Rich, and also to have the opportunity to get to know the Southwest Harbor Library community a little bit better by doing this. It's really a privilege for me. It's the first time I've done it, so bear with me. But I've over the years that I was writing this book, and over the years that I was experiencing what I write about, I've had so many wonderful conversations with people about all of this and about the issues involved in transition and change and retirement and the possibilities of what might come after. So I welcome this opportunity to talk about it, and also hopefully a little bit later to hear from you if you have reactions or interests or curiosities. I thought I might begin kind of briefly by telling you just a little bit about what the book is about, as Charles just did, by reading you a bit of the preface. I don't know how many of you have read it, but I wanted to set the context and give you a sense of a jumping off point for our discussion, and also to just give you a general idea of the fact that the book is not just about retirement. It's about change, and it's about how change happens from one life transition to another. And instead of talking about that in a clinical way or in an academic way, what happened to me is I ended up talking about it personally, my own journey. And I have found over these years and talking to other people that that was something that was meaningful to them, and that they were able to relate to different aspects of it. So I welcome this opportunity, and I really thank you.
So we're looking forward to spending some time with you, Rebecca.
Great. So this is the abbreviated preface. Over the last 10 years, since I turned 60, I have found myself somewhat unexpectedly immersed in what has been a very deliberate process of change. I didn't intend to engage in such a process, but it has felt inevitable, necessary, and insistent. The centerpiece of this time of transition and transformation has been the process of retirement, getting ready to contemplate the idea that at the beginning was utterly preposterous to me, dithering and doubting and second guessing myself about whether or not I really did want to retire, and if I did, was it really the time? Finally coming to the conclusion that I was ready, and then taking the leap, jumping out into the unknown, and then finding my way slowly but surely to find out what was next, what happened. And what happened, what was so surprising to me was what happened just didn't look at all like what had gone before. Frankly, I'm still amazed at what has unfolded. Before I turned 60, I never thought much about being of retirement age, being this old, nor about what retirement might even look like. So every aspect of this time and experience has been somewhat surprising to me. And it has been quite a journey. In the beginning, I rejected the idea out of hand and stayed in denial for a very long time. But finally, I got feisty with myself, braver and honest, had to admit to myself that it was time, and I let go. After I let go, left town, free fall happened, a limbo open time that was crucial to what came after. And then finally, when I came up for air after this, I began to understand where I was headed and what I wanted to do and be in the future, discovering as I did that I was going to be living in an entirely different way. But the greatest discovery and the greatest gift of this journey has been finding my way to becoming a writer. I really didn't anticipate this, and I have found that writing offered me a way to make sense of the journey I had been on. So 3 years ago, I started writing about it, and I thought, I don't know where this is going, and I certainly didn't think it was going to be a book. But with each passing chapter, I realized that the writing process gave me a way to think more deeply about what had happened and to answer questions such as, how does such a transition come about? What are the signals? Or do you just sort of blindly move into it? And then what happens? And how do you navigate that crossing over? And then once you do, how do you get to know yourself all over again? That was certainly something that I needed to do, to get to know myself all over again. But the most important part was to hold myself back from getting busy and really flailing around doing what I'd done before, so that I could wait and let whatever was going to happen that might be unexpected and wonderfully new happen. So that's what this book is about. And it is a book that really is a conversation. And I hope that some pieces of it might resonate for you. I know that when Charles and I talked, he asked me some questions about different parts that were kind of fun to think about, that I kind of didn't think about would be particularly interesting to somebody. So I'm going to stop here and let Charles sort of point me in whatever direction he wants to point me with a question.
Well, in your opening remarks, and thank you very much for them, you've used a couple of terms that I was going to piggyback on. So one of them is you talked about your journey and getting to a certain point where the decision was clearer. And you talked at a point about the tipping point. What was the tipping point? Can you describe in any way beyond what you've said in the book about what that tipping point was for you, how it revealed itself to you?
Yeah, I love the term of tipping points, because what I love about it is the notion that a whole bunch of things are happening that you're not consciously thinking are kind of coming together to make something happen at the end. But it's kind of like something's getting fertilized over time, and then suddenly something happens and the whole thing tips over, all the dominoes. And for me, it was, I mean, one of the things about my process and my tipping point was that I felt sort of like, oh, is that what all of this was meaning? So in 1960, I turned 60 in 2010, and I sort of belied the concert. I said, it doesn't matter that I turned 60. It's not significant. I feel very healthy and I'm ready to go and whatever. But over time, I began to feel more and more restless at work and even in my home. And I just began to be restless. And then there were days when I was changing my clothes all the time. And I thought, what is the matter with me? And it was very confusing and overwhelming and whatever. But I went on with my life, whatever. But, and this is probably an obvious tipping point, in 2011, in January, my daughter, who had been living in Washington, D.C. in her 20s and had gone in and out, sometimes she moved in, sometimes she moved out, finally moved out of our house and moved to New York for a new job, a real job. And what I cite in the book is 3.5 weeks later, we didn't plan this. My husband said, well, let's go look for an apartment. And I said, what? Look for an apartment? We're not planning to move an apartment. Well, we went and looked at an apartment and we ended up buying it and moving. And that was really the tipping point. for me, that because moving out of a house into an apartment meant that everything changed in my routine. And that sort of allowed me to both be more conscious of the change process, but also open up to the fact that this was not so bad. I liked doing things a little differently, but in no way at that point did I consider that I was ready to retire.
Well, and when I read it through the second time, you were so generous with the clients that you were helping, and you quoted yourself about the guidance you were giving them with what they were facing in their lives. And it occurs to me to ask you, when you, and I don't know anything about being a professional counselor, I will say that, but you probably have a series of questions and guidance. Did you hear those tools that you've used with others in a new way as they might have applied to you and you're getting ready for a new journey? You know, was there the voice that you were expressing to your clients, customers, begin to sound or resonate with you yourself and where you were on your journey?
That's a great question. I think what really resonated for me more than kind of the types of things I might say was the part, and there's a part in the book that I talk about, that my clients and I would come, you know, people want to change. We all want, you know, when we're at a point in our lives, sometimes we feel stuck and we want to move on. But what would often happen is that my clients and I would sort of ponder how long change seemed to be taking, and that sometimes it just didn't seem to be happening. So I feel as if what the voice that I heard in my head throughout this process was this voice that said, okay, now I'm going through some major change, so I want to understand what makes this happen, why it's happening for myself, which is what I think I was hoping to instill in my clients, is that curiosity and also an acceptance of the fact that we didn't really understand it. I certainly didn't understand what was happening, but if I gave myself permission, which was a huge deal, I really struggled with that, to just be open to, okay, well, what is happening? And I'm not necessarily in charge here. I don't, it's kind of unknown. So giving myself permission to just go with the flow, I guess.
Well, and I don't want my questions to give you a chance to tell the whole book, because part of the wonderful piece of the experience of the book is the reading and listening to your voice come through the words, because it's clear to me, and you explain it to a degree, how you express things, the words and the vocabulary you use was really important to you. And it came through to me, and it really made me value the effort you put in to choose just the right way of saying things for the rest of us all to benefit from. So now I'm going to turn a little bit. So you talked about trust falls, and that you can explain it a little bit to those who haven't read, but don't give it all away. But I wondered if you could share any trust falls you took, and who were those people in whom you had such trust to take the fall with them, with their support, anticipating their support.
Do you think I need to define a trust fall?
Well, I think you should a little bit, not a whole, not in great detail, but it's a journey where it's an action where you take risk and you've got some supportive system around you, whatever that is, and you take an action, but the support is not going away.
Right. Well, actually, the first time I ever encountered trust falls was when I was teaching 7th graders, and we went on sort of an outward bound weekend, and they were a very difficult group, so they needed to learn to cooperate. And one of the exercises, which probably many of you have done, is you stand in a circle, and somebody stands in the middle and is very stiff, and they let their weight go back, and the people in the circle not just catch them, but pass them around so that they're off balance and allowing themselves to be totally supported by the group. And I love it's movement metaphor. I just think it's beautiful. And I love that you bring it up. When you wrote me that question, I thought, I'm going to really think about that. And I have to say that along the way, along this process, I feel as if I have been supported in that way by many people who question me and who didn't let me disappear. They sort of mirrored my journey and I love to talk about this stuff. So as I said in the end of the book, I talked about it endlessly and people put up with me. And that was one way, trust fall. The other person, obviously, who, both my children and especially my husband is very, very forbearing and tolerant of my hyper focus on this over these many years. He's been a wonderful support and mirror. And when I needed it, to sort of say, okay, where are we? So
Right.
I hope that answers your question.
I think, and then you do mention across the story, across your memoir, a whole cadre of people that you turn to, some of whom you knew more than others, but they played an important role in allowing you to express your concerns and your anxiety, if I can use that word in a non-clinical way. I thought it was just wonderful. And I was thinking to myself, and I didn't know whether I was going to bring it up, and I'm going to bring it up now. So did you have a book launch in which everybody who was named in the book got invited to come and tell stories?
I would have loved that, but it's COVID.
Oh, I know. Well, maybe we can arrange that for you while you're on the island with those who might be coming to see you here.
I would love that because really I'm much more interested in other people's stories at this point. I know what my own is, and
Right.
I love hearing how people's resonate. I've given the book obviously to many friends, and there have been some really interesting reactions that I sort of didn't anticipate, that have been very meaningful. And one of them, which I think is really important for all of us to know, actually this has been said a couple of times, is this notion that I think we're so programmed to think that before we stop doing whatever it is we're doing in life, or before we move to a next stage, we have to know, we have to have a plan. We have to be really concrete about what we're going to do next. And what a couple of people have said is that they really valued the idea, the concept that in fact, in many ways, it's much better if you don't know. Not only if you don't know, but if you give yourself time to just be in the middle with nothing, that sort of what they call the neutral zone, the fertile void of not knowing, and allowing yourself just to uncouple from what was in order to empty out and be ready for what might be.
I agree. And my journey, someday when we're together and have a cup of coffee, I'll tell you my journey into retirement. Didn't look at all like yours. I wished I'd had your book. But it was really, really helpful. And you've made a reference, I think, to your having roots around us here in Maine. So I was hopeful, because I think your writing is so good, that the paragraph about when you talk about your cabin, I think that would be fun for everyone to hear you read your voice, so that they have your voice in their heads when they read that section. And I have it.
It's on page,
Let's see,
49.
49. Yeah, 49.
I'd love to. My husband and I own a cabin on the western edge of an island in Maine. Lofty ancient pines and mangy scruffy spruces ring the cabin's exterior. Through the branches, we see an expanse of water stretching toward a bluish, bell-shaped mountain on the mainland. The cabin is close enough to the ocean that we hear seals burp when they come up for air. At high tide on a breezy day, waves gently lap the rocks just below our bedroom window. It is a place without a lot of motion or commotion, peaceful and still except for the occasional osprey's sharp cry as he flies overhead, or the far-off roar of a lobster boat engine as it heads out to sea. Otherwise, the quietness of woods, sky, rock, and sea prevails, cushioning the moments with a sense of removal and repose.
I love that. And it's so evocative to me. I think you've really captured it in such a wonderful way. and probably all of us in the room have a dimension of that experience in our lives, and it's a factor of why we're here, why we're on the island, either permanently or seasonally, you know.
Yes, I was, when I was working with a colleague, and we were on a board together and we were writing things. And one day he said to me, there are so many water images in your writing. He said ocean and sailing and whatever. And I said, well, I feel as if Maine has had an effect on my sensibilities from the time I was born. The smells and the light and the air, and just the way in which I know that my nerves totally ratchet down, and I become peaceful. And in the book, I call myself shoeless,
Yeah.
sort of childlike, because it's a place that's a real refuge for me.
Right.
And an inspiration.
Yep. So we're going to have a question and answer period, but I see that Kate has raised her hand. Kate, do you want a question for us now, or advice about what's going on behind the scenes?
Just letting you know that folks can raise their hand when they have questions. So
Okay.
that feature is enabled.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And then you, Erich and Kate are monitoring the chat. If you prefer to just put your question in the chat, they'll relay that to us. So I'm going to take this break, and I'm looking up at Kate's picture, which is the front door of the Southwest Harbor Library. You've made such positive comments about libraries in your life at this stage, and I thanked you the other day for the bibliography. We're delighted to have all those titles, and if anybody who's listening and wants to get acquainted with some of the titles that Rebecca includes, they're available through your library. Don't always go to Amazon first. Your library and interlibrary loan can bring them right to you at your local library. But I wanted to ask you, pursuing that train of thought, Rebecca, were you always a kid whose parents took you to the library? Was the library always a piece of your growing up experience?
Yeah. Well, I have to admit that my initial love of the library in my town where I grew up was because it had a huge fish tank. And I loved going to sit by that fish tank because for some reason I just loved the sound, like it's sort of white noise, but it was bubbling. And when I went back to my high school reunion 4 years ago, I went to that library and that fish tank is still there. So it was a wonderful thing. But no, the reason I love libraries is that they're open to everyone, and that they're free. I mean, the fact that you can take out all those books and hold them and have them for a while and then give them back. There's something about that I find I feel like it's, how many experiences do we have in our lives these days where something is entirely free yet so rich?
Right. And that opportunity for young people, or to get your junior library card and borrow something from the children's room, it's an impactful memory for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Also, reading is, gosh, I don't know what I would have done without reading in my life. One of the reasons I wrote this book actually is that I always am, when I have a sort of a question, I keep looking for books to answer my question or write about what I'm interested in. And then I came upon this quote from Alexander Chi that said, I write the books I want to read. And I couldn't find another book that told the story, a personal story like this. There were either a lot of how-to books about retirement, or there were a lot of financial security books or health and happiness, but I couldn't find anyone talking about the ambivalence, the struggle, the journey, and then also the open-endedness of the experience, the possibilities afterwards. So that's why I wrote it.
Well,
we have a question from Elizabeth for you, Rebecca.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So what was the hardest part about letting go of work? Relinquishing your work identity, the use of your skills in familiar ways, or the structure for others?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it, Elizabeth. I'm sure all of you, or many of you, have been to Washington, D.C. and know that Washington, D.C. is a career-obsessed, work-oriented place where what you do is very much often how you feel defined. Whether or not that's true for everyone, I'm not sure, but certainly it is very much in the consciousness of the city, I think. The city feels very purposeful, important, and busy. So I really worried in the beginning about letting go of that identity. But it went hand in hand with the second part of your question, which is, I really loved what I did, and I loved learning. I worked so hard on getting better at what I was and developing the skill sets, and to be a good therapist and to use them, you know, with people. I also loved sitting with people and hearing their stories. So the combination of, oh my goodness, if I give up my work identity, will I be essentially ignored and put out to pasture? But also, will I be able to use any of the things that I most love about my work in my next life, in whatever I do? So those were real concerns. And what I came to feel is, the first one, I thought, well, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and just give up that identity. And if people don't think I'm important, well, so be it. I'm gonna see what happens on the other side. But the second part, what has so surprised me is that the skills that I most love have sort of transformed in my new life, so that I feel myself using them, but in new ways. And I wanted to stop being a psychotherapist. I wanted to stop being responsible for folks like that, because I felt that I was not concentrating hard enough and was just sort of done with doing that. But my skills, if I'm making any sense, have sort of translated themselves into my other interests. And I am so grateful for that, but I'm also so gratified that they don't just go away, they get transformed. Did you find that, Charles?
Yes, and do you see yourself, putting those skills to work in different settings now that you're a writer and you're going to be presenting to readers who've seen your book? I expect, as I have, you'll just see those skills you never thought would apply except in a certain scenario, and you go, oh, okay, that works, that makes sense. Yeah.
Right. It isn't well, there were some losses, of course, but what I feel now is it's more of a composite. I'm, the things that I wanted to leave behind, I have left behind, but I brought along some things, and they sort of unite with new things and become sort of synergistically something new and something energizing.
So you've been in this transition. It took you 3 years or so to get to where you are. And you use in the book, and I said this to you the other day, I love the metaphor or example that you use of the little Puritan on one shoulder, the little man or woman who's giving you advice. We all have them, but I never saw that you linked it, because you also make references to a person similarly positioned on your shoulder as the gremlin. So is the gremlin a positive advice giver, and the Puritan is a positive advice giver, or vice versa? Or do they have different roles as you went through whatever you were confronting? I love the idea that they were more than just this form on your shoulder, because many people have used that over time. And of course, here in New England, we know about Puritans, and we know what they've done good and what they've harmed. So that it just piqued my interest about your use of those two sort of in opposition to each other.
Right. Again, for those folks that haven't read it, but also I think maybe many of you can relate to this. I was raised with a voice inside me that was very puritanical, of sort of, what are you doing in the world that's purposeful, and what are you getting done, and what are you doing worthwhile, and you need to be engaged in the world and doing all of that. So I referred to a black-hatted, stiff-backed Puritan sitting on my shoulder, that as I began after I left my job, and when I went back to DC, I would be sitting doing something in my study, and this voice would start, and it was endless. You know, what are you doing with yourself? What have you got to show for your time? And the worst was, are you navel gazing? You know, introspection is not okay. You have to get out in the world. So the Puritan was sort of the, I don't know, not an angel or devil, but it was the voice that was guilt inducing. But I chose a gremlin as the opposite voice, because this was the voice that started to happen that said, just get on with it. Let go of what you used to do. Be brave. Just get on with it, and don't fill your time with something you're familiar with. And so it isn't a particularly, gremlins are kind of feisty, and this voice was very feisty, and it was very pushy, but it kept me, it kept fighting with the Puritan in me, and it kind of won, which I was very gratified by.
That seems like you've reached a wonderful place with those two advisors there in your life. So I just want to remind and encourage anybody who's got a question to please share those with us, and with Rebecca, not with me. I'm not the expert or an author, but it's just terrific to have so many of you participating with us. I'm looking up in my bifocals to see what's popping up on the screen. So there were a couple of other techniques you've used, and I wanted to ask you if you've turned them into habits. I learned a lot of vocabulary in one particular section where you talked about words that occurred to you, and you were using them sometimes as an escape from being purposeful, and sometimes, I don't know how they propped into your life, but these were some of the words. Hang on, now I've lost my spot. Hamadrus. In that section about hamadrus on 101, I had to go look all of those up because I'd never heard those words before. Are you still collecting new words like that in a list for yourself or a journal?
Yeah. One of the things I talk about when I was trying to learn how to sort of create a writing practice, enter a writing life, was that I would sit at my desk a long time and not have anything to write, and just sort of, what am I doing? I'm just sitting and staring out the window. But one of the things that I found was really kind of refreshing and let me, again, get off my own back and just sort of get into the imaginative realm, was to write down, I would sort of come across a word that really kind of tickled my fancy. And hamadras, that was from, I think, I don't know if any of you have read Robert McFarlane's books. They're books about nature, and they're wonderful.
Oh, no.
And he, in this book, Landmarks, he is trying to retrieve some of these words that are disappearing, that are no longer used. And he uses, so hamadras is one of them. And I did make a list of that. I'm trying to find it. Hamadras is the low humming noise, apparently, that you hear sometimes in a forest.
Okay.
But I did, so, and ludic, it was from an article about a children's author, Mo Willems, who's very, very playful. And that word means something like spontaneous or playful. But every time I'd come upon a word like that, it would just fire up my imagination, even if after that I couldn't sit down and say, well, now I'm going to write something about it. But I did a lot of that, or just sort of writing down things that kind of interested me or puzzled me. Like one day I spent a whole day researching, because in a poem I read about the bifocal nature of the dragonfly. And in this poem, it talks about the way in which that might be a cue for us in terms of holding both joy and tragedy at the same time, to have bifocal eyes or something. And so I researched it, and indeed a dragonfly has eyes that can go all the way around in its head. Which, who knew that? So
Right.
It didn't show up in my writing, but I thought it was really interesting.
Well, I like the idea that you used it. It wasn't advancing necessarily the memoir or the advice about what you were confronting with retirement, but it was a technique you used to stay stimulated and encouraged and creative.
Yeah, exactly. It was a technique, for sure.
So, Erich, we have no pending questions out there from the crowd.
Right now, feel free to raise
Okay,
your
we'll
hand.
keep going. So another technique you used, Rebecca, was these lists, and you talked about them. One of them was self-description 2012 and goals 2012. And so it occurred to me to probe a little bit. Is that technique one you've continued? Are you still creating such lists or similar lists? And the second part of my inquiry about it is, have you gone back to those lists from 2012? And what have they revealed to you when you've looked at them in 2019 and 2020?
That's an interesting question. So the first part of your question, I was making those lists when I was, after I went back to DC, I was kind of very nervous and anxious. And before I sort of calmed down and got busy sort of being open to what might come, I did what I normally do, which is make to-do lists, or listing always kind of calmed me down when I was worried about what I was doing. And so, I would, in that fall, I was making a lot of lists, sort of potentially, what am I going to be? Am I going to be a thought leader, an educator, blah, 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 blah. And then, and the goals list, which I found, I have, well, first of all, I haven't returned to the definitions list, the self-description. And that's really happy, because I don't want to describe myself anymore. I look at those terms and I think that's what I spent the middle half of my life doing, saying, oh, I'm a teacher, and I'm an educator, and I'm a mother, and I'm a this, and I'm a that. And what I loved about this time of life was that it really taught me how just to be, and not to be what I was doing. And it just, I feel like that's just such a gift, and it's still going on, even though this is a new decade and I don't know what's going to happen in this decade. The second half of the list, and I'm trying to find it, it's on page 67. I return to this quite often, because all of these are rewords: reset, to recast, to redefine, and then to free up and upend. And I do reflect on that, because I feel as if actually that's what's happened, that I have reset myself, I have freed up myself, and I have upended myself. And when I wrote that list, it was very purposeful, and this is what I'm really going to do. But now they feel very different. They just feel that they describe a certain experience of turning something over, like turning over a rock and finding all the things that are underneath it that you didn't know were there.
And when I hear you describe it, it occurs to me that you're doing those things that were on that list. They've just become part of your behavior, part of your strategy, part of the techniques for life, is doing those resets.
Right.
And it's great, and very exciting to see where it takes you, And,
Right.
and we have our friend of the library, Susan Buell, who has a question. Do we need to unmute Susan? Oh, no, there
I
you
think I just did it. Anyway,
did
hi,
it.
Rebecca, good to see you. The first part of Charles's question and your first answer, that just being is what you're doing. I don't remember exactly how you phrased it. I have to say that, I mean, I have had a lot of struggle in my life about the product. What is the product? What is the product? And I have to tell you, last week in a therapy session, I announced that I was the product. So I think it's similar to what you're saying right there. We are, this person here is the product. And it reminds me, I don't know whether you're familiar with Leo Leone's children's books. There was a book called Pensatina, and this geometric shape was trying to fit itself into this, that, and the other place, trying to find its place in the world. And then at the end it says, I am myself, he shouted, full of pride. So I guess that's another way of saying the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Thank you. That's really
Rich and Kate, you need to get that book out of the collections and put it on display on the circulation desk for everyone to share.
It's a great, Leo Leone is great, and that's a great book. Yeah.
They do say that among the research I did a lot of research on this stage of life after, well, really from 55 to 75. A lot of people are writing about this being a new developmental stage before real old age, if you have your health and, you know, some security and whatever. And one of the things they found, Brene Brown talks about this, is that this is among the age cohorts, this is potentially the happiest, most content age cohort.
I can imagine.
And I think Susan, it's that has something to do with it. As you get to a certain level where you can begin to really accept who you are and what you are, and not have to strive to be something you think you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Others have their expectations for you, and you find yourself striving to meet their expectations rather than what are your own and what fulfills you
Exactly.
every day. So I always want to ask authors, what's your writing technique? I know you developed it and you had a wonderful writing coach that you worked with faithfully that probably helped you structure your methodology. Are you a writer on paper? Are you a writer on a computer? Do you get up and write before breakfast? Do you wait until dark and have had your beverage with dinner? And what's the technique of the Rebecca Milliken, author?
Well, I think the biggest part of my technique is place, is having a space where it's kind of like creating a nest, where I know that I can go where writing is going to happen. And so I have a wonderful desk that I describe at home that has a big window. It has to have it also has to have sort of a way I can look out the window, because I stare out the window so much of the time. But I'm a morning person, but I'm not an early morning person. This is a part of me that didn't go away. I'm a very routine person. So I said to myself, when I really decided to start working with this coach, that I was going, she said, even if you don't write, visit your writing every day, visit your writing in quotes. And so I decided that any day I could, I would go to my desk at 9 o'clock in the morning. And what I have discovered is that a lot of times an hour and a half is what I can do before I have to trot down to the kitchen to get coffee or turn on MSNBC or do whatever. And if I'm really involved in a project, I can go back and do a couple of more 1.5 hours. However, sometimes I can't. But 1.5 hours is something that if I can put that in and move into the writing space, then I feel as if I've really done something, even if I haven't produced anything. And the other thing is that once I got really going with this, I made about dates with my coach about every month or 5 weeks. And that really helped, because in the beginning, it was just I had to show up with something. So having a deadline meant that even if it was at the end of that period of time, I actually produced something in writing that we would then talk about on the phone. So what I found is when I really got down to the writing, I also needed blocks of time. I needed, for example, to have a whole day, maybe not to be totally concentrated, but to know that I could have a whole day to just be in that kind of reverie space and think about it. Does that answer your question?
It does. It helps. I mean, I love picturing authors at work and trying to scope it out. And I've been with some authors and they write everything in longhand. Then they have a scribe who writes it, who types it all up for them. Then they get the type pages back and go over them for the first round of edits. It's just an amazing, it was the way their creativity resulted in positive outcomes, and they were making progress. Even
Right.
if-
I'm always impressed with people who write in longhand. I
Yeah.
write on my laptop or my computer,
Yeah.
and I can't do it in longhand, but I do all my writing journals, and where I keep my lists is all longhand. I mean, it's all printed, but
Right.
the actual writing doesn't happen unless I'm on a computer.
Well, I've known an author who has like 2 ancient Underwood typewriters. So that when one of them is broken, the other one can be brought in while the first one is getting repaired. And that's the way that author produces. And it's fascinating to me the way these disciplines have developed for them.
Mhm.
So another kind of standard question for authors is, well, 2, what are you working on for the next book? Even though you're in the midst of just launching this one, have you got some ideas that are just rattling around and you're going to be experiencing them and living with them for a while?
Yeah, you asked me that the other day, and somebody else asked me that.
And
Actually,
it's okay if you don't have an answer.
well, no, I don't. I have an answer, and that is that this whole phase, this whole phase of actually producing a book and then having people read it. I have to be honest with you. I wrote this book for me, and I think one of the ways I could do that, to write a book, is to never imagine who would read it, because the thought of it was so intimidating, frankly, in the beginning. But so what I have found is that I'm so in this phase of, oh, now people are reading this and having a reaction, and that's pretty interesting to me. So I'm sort of there. And I know in terms of my writing practice that I sort of have to get done with something before my mind gets freed up to find out what's next.
Right.
So that's very much what I'm doing. I'm just sort of amazed that I'm actually talking to people about what I've written. So.
Well, and you'll learn from the reactions you get, how successful or what to add if you ever do a new edited version. But I think you're talking about writing it for yourself really colors the way you express the story. It is so personal, and it comes through very successfully. And at the same time I say that, I read it with, that's part of my journey. That's me. It isn't just so particular, Rebecca Milliken. It's what we're all going through as we transition from one chapter to the next chapter, and to keep looking for what the future chapter is going to be about.
Oh, I'm so glad that the fact that people can find some resonance in it, and the fact that other people have said to me, I feel like I'm talking to you. Those are the 2 comments that,
Yeah.
I mean, if that's all I ever hear, boy, that's enough.
Those are special, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're just getting started, so I wasn't going to ask you what you heard from your fan mail or other comments. That's enough of a tantalizing tidbit of what you've learned and what the comments have been meaningful to you so far. And I only expect there are going to be more of them, and more earnest ones, as you continue, being the live voice that you've embedded so well on these pages. It's really been a privilege. So here's another question authors often get asked, and especially if we're in a library and we're all lovers of libraries and books, what's on your nightstand?
Oh, I know, they do always ask that in the New York Times.
They do that at times too, yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading a lot of books at the same time. I'm working my way through White Fragility, and also through a book called Conundrum, which is about a guy, is by Jan Morris, a person who at 3 documents how it was a little boy who he knew he was born in the wrong body, and that was in the 30s. And I'm also reading a mystery story, because that's my sort of vacation. And the other book I'm reading by Claudia Rankine is a book called Just Us, which is just a very powerful book. But frankly, since in preparing for this, I haven't read much in the last few days. So I'm really excited about getting back to it.
Yes, well, you deserve it with the holiday weekend coming up as well. And your time in Maine, we know how meaningful it is. I know from reading you that your time in Maine is really valuable and restorative and inspirational as well.
Thank you, Charles. It's been a pleasure.
Is there, I'm not seeing that we have any other questions. Anybody want to be so bold as to raise their hand and ask a question? I feel like we're coming kind of toward the end, just for the momentum is slowing down a little bit, but I don't want to cut anybody off.
I think chat is disabled. Maybe if you open it, people would ask questions.
Erich and Kate, did you hear that the chat is disabled? Can you attend to that, wizards behind the screen? You're Erich, if you're talking to us, you're muted.
Yeah, it's enabled now. Yeah, it looks like it did get disabled. So
Okay.
everyone.
All right. So please take advantage and join in this, what I have found to be a wonderful, charming conversation with a new friend. And always good to make new friends, and always good to make new friends of the Southwest Harbor Public Library. It's been,
I wanted to say that it's really nice of people to tune in on this hot day. I'm sure it's as hot up there as I'm in what I call Lower Maine, which is near Bath, where my family was, and it has been hot today. I mean, I'm sure most of you don't have air conditioning, but I have wonderful fans, and I'm sitting in front of 2 of them. So I hope you guys are too.
I haven't even succumbed to a fan. Oh, here's Elizabeth Fox again. Shall I read it, Erich?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hang on. Financial security makes retirement possible. Do you have any thoughts about delaying retirement to achieve more security, or just how finances factor into the decision?
Oh, that's a great question. What was the first part? How to delay to provide financial security
makes retirement possible. Do you have any thoughts about?
I don't know about. I'm not a financial person, so I wouldn't advise anything. I do totally agree with you that financial security totally affects how you can make this decision. And in many cases, and many of my friends aren't able to retire yet, even though they would like to. But in many of the conversations I had with folks, what we talked about was even with that constraint, trying to sort of incorporate some of the thinking about getting free in other ways. In other words, you know, it is a terrible thing to want to retire and not be able to, and to be done and not be able to. So what we talked a lot about is, were there other ways to allow oneself to just feel freer? But yeah, short of that, it's just, I feel so grateful that I was able to do this without worrying about it, but I am very mindful that it's not the case in so many cases.
I would suggest that perhaps there's advice or experiences about that are embedded in all of the books that you've added to your bibliography. There may be some case studies or advice that's in some of those books. So I would encourage people to look at some of that.
And we also have a question from Mark asking, how did others, your peers, family, acquaintances react to you retiring at the early age of 60?
Well, I talk about that in the book. In many cases, people said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that? Just cut back, or you're burnout, so take a break." Or they were, "What are you going to do? Play golf? Play bridge?" That kind of typical. So there weren't many people around me that were retiring. And I had a friend who I talked to who had moved to Maine after she retired. And we often talked about the different population, that I was talking to all these people that were actively working and couldn't imagine and didn't want to imagine retiring. And she was teaching at the senior college in Brunswick or wherever that is. And she was finding a whole bunch of retired people very happily and who really embraced this and wanted to talk about it. So people responded differently. And then afterwards, people would just sort of say to me, "What are you doing? Get busy. What are you doing?" And they couldn't, I mean, I had a couple of people, I realized that I didn't talk about writing because A, I didn't think I was writing a book, but B, it was too hard to explain. So even when I got finished writing this book, I called my brother, who I'm very close to, and I said, "Hey, my book is being published." And he said, "What book?" So I don't think I talked about what I was doing afterwards because I was worried people would nudge me to do something else.
Well, I retired right around 60, 61, and I'd made choices that didn't at all mirror the advice you give in your memoir. So I'm still, unfortunately, behaving, at least in my humble opinion now, with 10 years experience, I'm behaving like I'm still working.
Uh-huh.
I'm taking on responsibilities where I'm doing things that I did when I was working, and it's like 10 years is enough. It's time for me to step back from some of these things and do the fun things that
Good.
I've always wanted to do. And once pandemic finally lifts, and I have confidence, I think we'll all be traveling more than we've been able to travel for a long time, even just to see family remotely in the States, you know, not even international travel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have had a great crew with us on this journey together and through your memoir, Rebecca, and I thank you for your time and for your preparation with me and Erich and Kate getting the program together. Oop, here comes Elizabeth. I can't read what that says. Erich, can you read it better?
So Social Security pays most if people wait until 70 to receive it, perhaps considering circumstances of those without lots of security repays attention. So I think, yeah, it's just, yeah.
It's
Thank
a very
you.
good reminder, Elizabeth. I thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
For what it's worth. Oh, I couldn't pick up on what that was. For what it's worth. I am in email, but there are a lot of those that I still don't know.
Me too.
Well, thank you. I'm feeling that at least my sitting here without a fan, I'm getting uncomfortable and I'm ready to find a cold drink and move on to the rest of my evening. Unless
Well,
someone has a parting shot they want to share.
Well, I just want to thank you all for being with me about this. It was great. It's my first book talk, so it's great practice, and I really appreciate you all joining us.
Well, and I've told other people who appeared at the Southwest Harbor Library, I always say, and when you win the Pulitzer Prize, you have to give credit to your first public talk at the Southwest Harbor Public Library.
Okay.
Well, thank you again. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the 4th of July in Maine, and stay cool. And come to see us in the Southwest Harbor Public Library when you're on at this end of the state.
I for sure will. Happy 4th of July to everybody.
Thank you very much. All the best. Good night, all. Thanks for being with us.